history has brought me to this place. Jay passed the torch to me to continue the work of Best Times, and I have found that the most enjoyable labor of love, so I plan to stay on board for as long as I can until there's nobody left. Hopefully I'm the last one, but you never know. But the current issue has, I've already been at work on the current issue. It'll be coming out in about 2 weeks. And there's a lot more in there about Ralph, because I had the unhappy task of doing something with the loss of 4 of our classmates. And when I say labor of love, I mean precisely that. The emotions that settled in on me, as Jay has recounted as well, can be awfully powerful, because after all, these were people with whom we lived and breathed and enjoyed life and knew each other growing up, or we knew a little bit about each other and a lot later on, or a lot then and little later on. It's really all of a patchwork quilt about what can we say about another human being, since we're all in motion in some way, and accessibility to one another's lives is sometimes terribly limited, which I confessed in the issue you'll soon read. We just don't know a whole lot about people sometimes after we have been their classmates. So there's always a question of accessibility to people and who they are 40 or 50 years later. And of course, losses. We all deal with losses. On the way over here, I made a stop at St. Joseph Cemetery in my old hometown of Council Bluffs and visited the gravesite of my mom and my dad and my brother John, who died in the Westroads killings here in Omaha 5 years ago. He was the last one to die before he tried to get the gun away from Robert Hawkins, who then killed himself. So I like to think of him as dying a hero, but it's no substitute for enjoying a cup of coffee with him and talking about life. And then now my sister is laid to rest there. So a long time ago, Bill Cleary, Mr. Query in those days, said, PJ, why don't you learn to think thematically? Don't just take simple narratives and settle for that, because it's frankly boring. Think thematically. So as I thought about the newest newsletter to come out, I went to one of my favorite authors by the name of Norman Maclean, whom you might be aware of as the person who wrote a wonderful short story called The River Runs Through It. He also wrote a longer exploration of the Man Gulch fire outside of Helena, Montana in the late 60s, and it's called Young Men and Fire. It's a laborious exploration of what happened to a group of 10 young men who were smoke jumpers who jumped into a forest fire area, and then they were all killed by the forest fire. It's a good exposition, but nothing like the readability of A River Runs Through It. But in the story, and in the movie as well, which was done by Robert Redford several years after the short story was published, Norman talks about his childhood, growing up in Missoula, Montana. His dad was a Presbyterian minister, and he taught him all of them how to fly fish. So it's a story about fly fishing. It's a story about life. It's a story about family connections. It's a story about loss. So I'm going to take one of Maclean Sr.'s sermons, just a brief section of it, when he lost his son Paul, who is a much darker character in A River Runs Through It than you saw in Brad Pitt in the movie. Paul was killed apparently because of alcohol abuse and gambling debts somebody collected by killing him. So Senior McLean stood before his congregation on a Sunday morning, and actually it's quite well portrayed in the movie, and he said this, and it's most pertinent to us today. He said, "Each one of you here today will at one time in your life look upon a loved one who is in need and ask the same question. We are willing to help, Lord, but what, if anything, is needed? For it is true, we can seldom help those closest to us. Either we don't know what part of ourselves to give, or more often than not, the part we have to give is not wanted." And so it is with those we live with and should know